You'll both need to sign here." Harold Jenkins pushed two identical contracts across his desk. His office smelled like old books and furniture polish. "Standard liability forms. Cemetery work comes with risks." I scanned the document while Johnny clicked his pen impatiently beside me. The contract looked straightforward enough. A week-long agreement to guard Lone Fir Cemetery from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m., with compensation that was honestly better than I'd expected for basically sitting in a guard shack all night. "This seems fine," I said, signing my name on the line. "Michael Thompson." Johnny scribbled his signature without reading a word. "So what exactly are we guarding against? Grave robbers? Teenage vandals?" Harold's face stayed blank. "Mostly you're a deterrent to trespassers. Your presence alone prevents most problems." He collected our contracts and tucked them into a folder, then pulled out a single sheet of paper from his desk drawer. "There are rules you need to follow during your shifts." He handed me the sheet. The paper looked fresh, recently printed with 5 numbered items in a clean, professional font. Nothing handwritten or sketchy looking, which somehow made it worse when I started reading. 1. Lock all gates at 9 p.m. sharp. Do not open them for anyone until 6 a.m. 2. If you see a tall figure standing in the 3rd row of gravestones, do not approach it under any circumstances. 3. If you hear a woman crying, ignore her. Do not attempt to find or help her. 4. At exactly 3:33 a.m., a man in a white suit may appear at the front gates. Do not let him in, no matter what he says. 5. If any spirits ask for your help, politely decline. I looked up from the paper to find Harold watching me. A chill ran up my neck. "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked, handing the list to Johnny. "Do I look like I'm joking, Mr. Thompson?" Harold's voice stayed perfectly even. Johnny burst out laughing after reading the rules. "Oh man, this is great. Do you guys do this to all the new hires, like an initiation thing?" He elbowed me. "Mike? Come on, they're trying to freak us out." Harold didn't crack a smile. "These rules exist for your safety. I expect you both to follow them." "Sure thing, boss." Johnny gave him a mock salute. "We'll watch out for ghosts and guys in fancy suits." I wanted to kick Johnny under the desk. Harold Jenkins was in his 60s. His gray hair was neatly combed and he looked very serious. He wasn't playing around. "The guard shack has everything you need," Harold continued, ignoring Johnny's attitude. "Bathroom, coffee maker, vending machine. There's a logbook where you'll record any incidents. Previous guards have left notes you might find useful." "Any particular incidents we should know about?" I asked. Harold folded his hands on the desk. "Just follow the rules, Mr. Thompson." He showed us around after that. The guard shack near the main entrance, the layout of the 15-acre property surrounded by iron fencing that had to be at least 10 feet high. The cemetery itself was beautiful in a solemn way, with old maple trees and rows of headstones dating back to the 1800s. "Keys will be under the mat on your first night," Harold said as we headed back to the parking lot. "Make sure you're early. I won't be here to greet you." Johnny waited until we were in my car before exploding. "What a nut job. Those rules. I bet they've got people hiding in costumes to scare us on our first night." I pulled onto the main road, gripping the steering wheel. "I don't think so." He seemed dead serious. "That's part of the bit," Johnny insisted. "Think about it. No way a real job would have rules about ghosts and mystery men. It's just hazing the new guys." Maybe he was right. It seemed more logical than the alternative, that we needed to be warned about supernatural threats in a Portland cemetery. But the way Harold looked so serious when he gave me that list. "You're overthinking this," Johnny said, reading my expression. "It'll be easy money. We sit in the warm guard shack all night, eat snacks, and get paid. Plus, we can put security experience on our resumes." I nodded, trying to push down my nervousness. We needed the job. I had rent due next week, and Johnny's car insurance was about to lapse. We'd been friends since 3rd grade when he'd punched a kid who was making fun of my inhaler. Johnny had always been the bold one, the one who leapt without looking. I was the cautious one who researched everything and worried about consequences. "Just promise me you'll take it seriously," I said. "Even if it is a joke, we need this money." "I promise I will take ghost hunting very seriously." Johnny laughed and turned up the radio. Later that evening, after I'd made dinner and was sitting at my laptop, Johnny called. "Dude, I've been thinking about Rule 4. The man in white at 3:33. That's witching hour stuff, right?" "Actually, the witching hour is typically midnight or 3 a.m. in general," I said. "Not specifically 3:33. Whatever, Professor. My point is, they're obviously going to have someone show up in a white suit. We should mess with them back. Like pretend to be possessed or something." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "No, we shouldn't. If this is some weird test, the best way to pass is to follow the rules. You're no fun sometimes." I could picture Johnny rolling his eyes. "But fine, we'll play it your way for now." After we hung up, I started researching Lone Fir Cemetery. It was one of the oldest in Portland, established in 1855. The website looked normal enough: historical information, burial records, walking tour maps. Nothing about ghosts or strange phenomena or rules for night guards. I dug deeper, checking news archives and local forums. That's when I found the message board thread. It was from 3 years ago, buried in a paranormal discussion group. Someone had posted asking about the high suicide rate among former Lone Fir Cemetery employees. The thread had only a few replies, mostly skeptical, before the original poster stopped responding. I stared at the screen, feeling sick to my stomach. It could be coincidence or urban legend, but combined with those rules. I closed my laptop without saving the page. Johnny didn't need to see this. He'd either laugh it off or worse, become even more determined to treat our job like a game. This was exactly the kind of challenge he loved, proving he wasn't scared, showing he couldn't be tricked. The night before our first shift, I lay in bed looking at the ceiling, unable to sleep. I kept picturing the cemetery layout in my head. 15 acres surrounded by iron fencing. The third row of gravestones where we weren't supposed to go, near a tall figure. The main gates we needed to lock at 9 p.m. sharp. My phone lit up with a text from Johnny. "Ready for ghost busting tomorrow night?" I didn't answer. Instead, I got up and pulled out a small notebook from my desk drawer. I copied down the 5 rules word for word, then added my own notes about the cemetery layout. If these rules were real, if they actually mattered, I wanted to be prepared. When I finally closed my eyes around 4 a.m., I dreamed of iron gates opening and a voice calling my name from the third row of graves. I woke from my nightmare about the iron gates right as my alarm blared. The dream stuck with me as I got ready for our first shift. I'd packed a thermos of coffee, extra batteries for the flashlights, and the notebook with my handwritten rules tucked in my jacket pocket. Johnny picked me up at 7:20 p.m., his car radio blasting. He turned it down when I climbed in. "Ready for our big ghost hunt?" He grinned, but I noticed he'd brought an extra sweatshirt and what looked like 3 energy drinks in his cup holder. "It's not a ghost hunt. It's a job." I buckled my seatbelt. "Did you read through the materials I sent you about the cemetery's history?" "Nope." Johnny pulled onto the street. "But I did watch 3 horror movies last night to prepare us for all the scary monsters." He waggled his fingers at me before putting them back on the steering wheel. We drove mostly in silence after that. The cemetery was on the east side of Portland, between older neighborhoods. As we pulled up to the main entrance, I checked my watch. 7:28 p.m. 32 minutes early. The iron gates stood open, just like in my dream. I got out and looked up at them. "Keys are under the mat," Johnny called, already heading for the guard shack. He stooped down and retrieved a heavy ring of keys, jangling them triumphantly. I caught up with him at the small building just inside the main entrance. The guard shack was about the size of a small studio apartment, with a main room that had a desk, 2 chairs, a small TV on the wall, and a window that looked out over the cemetery grounds. A tiny kitchenette with a microwave and coffee maker sat in one corner. There was a separate room with a couch that I guessed was for break times and a small bathroom. "Let's walk the perimeter before it gets completely dark," I suggested, pocketing the keys. "We should know the layout." Johnny shrugged. "Sure, why not? We got time to kill." The cemetery was in front of us, 15 acres according to the information Harold had given us. Old maple trees were scattered around the area with their branches reaching up against the darkening sky. The neat rows of headstones ranged from simple markers to fancy monuments, some dating back to the 1850s. We followed the fence line. It looked old but solid, with no obvious gaps or weak spots. "Check out this section," Johnny said, pointing to a cluster of ornate mausoleums. "Bet that's where all the rich folks are buried." I nodded, but my attention was on the rows of graves. I counted them silently, noting where the third row was in relation to the guard shack. That's where Harold said not to approach a tall figure if we saw one. 8:40, I said, checking my watch as we completed our loop. "I need to lock the gates." The main entrance had a heavy chain and padlock. I secured it, pulling twice to make sure it was properly fastened. The metallic clank bounced across the quiet cemetery. Back inside the guard shack, Johnny was fiddling with the heater. "This place is freezing," he complained, twisting knobs until warm air finally sputtered from the vents. "Okay, that's better." I sat down at the desk and opened the logbook Harold mentioned. The most recent entry was from last week, just a note about raccoons getting into some flower offerings. Nothing about tall figures or crying women or men in white suits. By 9:30, Johnny was already bored. He walked back and forth around the small space, eventually putting dollar bills into the vending machine and pressing buttons at random. "Want some chips?" He tossed a bag at me without waiting for an answer. "This is the easiest money we've ever made. Sit in a warm room, eat snacks, watch nothing happen all night." "We're supposed to be guarding the place," I reminded him. "From what? The vengeful spirits of the departed?" Johnny laughed, dropping into the second chair and propping his feet on the desk. "Oh no, Mr. Ghost, please don't knock over that flower vase. I'll have to write it in my spooky logbook." I didn't laugh. Instead, I watched the cemetery through the window. The grounds were silent and still under the security lights. No movement, no unusual sounds. Rule 1, check. Gates locked at 9 p.m. sharp. Johnny crumpled his chip bag and tossed it toward the trash can, missing. Rule 2, no tall figures in the third row yet. Rule 3, no crying ladies. Rule 4, no fancy dudes in white suits at the gate. And Rule 5, no ghosts asking for help. Man, this job is a breeze. "Just because nothing's happened yet doesn't mean nothing will," I said, retrieving his chip bag and putting it properly in the trash. "Come on, Mike. You don't actually believe that stuff, do you?" Johnny leaned back, balancing on 2 chair legs. "It's just Harold messing with us. Probably got a camera in here watching us jump at shadows." I didn't answer. The worried feeling from yesterday hadn't gone away. If anything, being here in the cemetery at night made it worse. The hours crawled by. Johnny flipped through channels on the TV with the volume low. I alternated between watching the grounds and reading through old log entries, looking for anything unusual. At 11:15, Johnny went to use the bathroom. I stretched and looked out the window, checking the rows of headstones lit up by the pale security lights. That's when I saw it. In the third row of graves between 2 maple trees stood a figure. It was tall, much taller than any normal person, and completely still. Just a dark silhouette, but definitely there. I checked my watch. 11:17 p.m. The bathroom door opened behind me. "Johnny," I said quietly. "Come here." "What's up?" He came to stand beside me. I pointed to the third row. "Look." Johnny squinted through the window, then sucked in a breath. Holy shit. The body didn't move. It just stood there, a black shape against the night, impossibly tall and thin. "We should check it out," Johnny said, already reaching for his jacket. I grabbed his arm. "No. Rule number 2, remember? Don't approach the person in the third row. It's probably just someone playing a prank. Johnny tried to pull away. Some guy on stilts or something. My grip tightened. I don't care what it is. We're not going out there. You can't seriously believe... I believe in following the rules of our job. I cut him off. Do you want to get fired on the first night? That seemed to reach him. Johnny reluctantly shrugged off his jacket again, but he kept staring out the window. Fine, but I'm keeping an eye on it. If it moves closer, all bets are off. We watched the figure for the next hour. It never moved, never changed position. Just stood there, a black cutout against the night. This is insane, Johnny muttered around 12:30. No one can stand that still for that long. He paced the small room, periodically going back to the window to look. Each time, his face grew more troubled. By 1 a.m., Johnny was no longer pretending it was a prank. He sat in his chair, eyes fixed on the window, knees bouncing with nervous energy. Maybe we should call Harold, he suggested. I shook my head. He said he wouldn't be available. Besides, he's the one who warned us about this. He already knows. Then what do? Nothing, I said. We follow the rules. We don't approach it. The person stayed put as 1 a.m. became 2 a.m. Neither of us felt like talking much. Johnny's earlier confidence had disappeared. He kept looking at the door, then back to the window, as if checking that the barrier between us and the person was still secure. At 2:25 a.m., I looked up from the logbook to see Johnny leaning forward in his chair. It's gone, he said. I joined him at the window. The third row stood empty now, just headstones and maple trees. No sign of the tall figure. Maybe it went behind a tree, Johnny suggested, but we both knew that wasn't the case. The security lights lit the area well enough to see there was nobody there anymore. I wrote in the logbook, keeping my entry factual. 11:17 p.m. Tall figure observed in third row. 2:25 a.m. Figure no longer visible. Johnny spent the rest of our shift trying to explain it away. It could have been a shadow from the trees, or maybe the cemetery has a scarecrow or something for birds, or some homeless guy on stilts who got bored of standing around. I didn't bother arguing. I'd seen what I'd seen, and so had he. When 6 a.m. finally arrived, we stepped outside into the early morning light. The cemetery looked different in the dawn, less threatening, just a peaceful place with stones and trees. See, nothing weird in the daylight. Johnny's voice was too loud, too forced. His hands shook as he pulled out his car keys. I unlocked the main gates and secured the guard shack. As we drove away, Johnny kept glancing in the rearview mirror. That was just some weird shadow thing, right? He didn't wait for me to answer. Has to be. No way it was actually, you know. I stared out the passenger window at the houses we passed, normal people still asleep in their beds, unaware of what existed just blocks away in the old cemetery. We have 6 more nights to get through, I reminded him. Johnny's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Yeah, 6 more nights. Sleep hadn't come easy after our first night at Lone Fir Cemetery. I tossed and turned all day, thinking about that tall figure standing still in the third row of graves. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it there, black against the night, completely still. By evening, rain had started falling over Portland, hitting my apartment windows in a way that would usually be calming. Tonight, it just made me more nervous. I packed extra carefully for our second shift. More coffee, protein bars, a rain jacket, and a second flashlight with new batteries. The notebook with the cemetery rules stayed in my jacket pocket. Johnny pulled up outside my apartment at 7:15 p.m., his windshield wipers working overtime against the downpour. I ran through the rain and jumped into the passenger seat, shaking water from my hair. Ready for night 2? I asked, buckling my seatbelt. Johnny didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the road. The car smelled like energy drinks. 3 empty cans rattled in the cup holder, and a 4th sat half-finished beside them. Couldn't sleep much, he finally said, pulling away from the curb. Kept thinking about that, whatever it was. I nodded. Yeah, me too. The rain got heavier as we drove, drumming on the roof. Johnny kept the radio off, which wasn't like him. Neither of us mentioned what we'd seen the night before, but we both knew it was there. We got to the cemetery around 7:32 p.m. The iron gates appeared through the rain, water streaming down the black metalwork. I unlocked them and pushed them open as water soaked through my jacket. Lock these at 9, right? Johnny asked, following me inside. His voice held none of yesterday's mockery. Yeah, Rule 1. The guard shack felt smaller tonight, more confining. Rain drummed against the roof and streaked down the windows, blurring our view of the cemetery. Johnny switched on every light in the place, then cranked up the heater until it was almost uncomfortably warm. We settled into our routine, checking doors, walking the perimeter, locking the gates at exactly 9 p.m. The rain made the cemetery look different. Headstones looked wet in the security lights, and the old maple trees swayed slightly in the wind, their wet branches moving across the grounds. Johnny kept glancing toward the third row of graves, then quickly looking away. Do you think it'll be back tonight? He asked, setting up a small speaker to play music from his phone. The volume was so low I could barely hear it over the rain. I don't know, I answered honestly, but I'm not going near that row either way. Johnny nodded, pulling out an energy drink. 8 more hours to go. We tried to keep ourselves occupied. I looked through the logbook again, reading entries from the previous months. Nothing unusual, just notes about maintenance needs, flower deliveries, and the occasional trespasser. Johnny scrolled through his phone, stopping sometimes to show me memes that neither of us thought were very funny. At 10:42 p.m., we both heard it. A woman's voice, soft but clear enough to cut through the sound of rainfall. Someone crying, deep, heartbroken sobs broken up by gasping pleas for help. Please, someone help me. Please. Johnny froze mid-sentence, his phone dropping to his lap. Do you hear that? I nodded, feeling the blood drain from my face. Rule 3. If you hear a woman crying, ignore her. Do not attempt to find or help her. Is that coming from inside the cemetery? Johnny stood up, moving to the window. The crying continued, growing more distinct. A woman's voice, trembling with desperation. I'm lost. Please, can anyone help me? I can't find my way. It seemed to be coming from the second row of graves, maybe 50 yards from the guard shack. Through the rain-streaked window, I couldn't see anyone, just wet headstones and shadows. Someone might be hurt, Johnny said, grabbing a flashlight from the desk. We should check it out. I stood up quickly. No, remember Rule 3. Are you serious right now? Johnny stared at me. There's a woman out there in the rain crying for help, and you want to ignore her because of some weird list. The crying grew louder, more desperate. Someone or something sounded really upset. It was the kind of crying that happens when someone hits rock bottom. Please, I need help. I'm so cold. Please. Johnny grabbed his rain jacket. I'm going to look. I moved to the door, blocking his path. Johnny, stop. Think about it. Who would be in a locked cemetery at nearly 11 at night in the pouring rain? I don't know. Someone who snuck in? Someone who got locked in accidentally? He tried to step around me. Move, Mike. No. Harold specifically told us not to help if we hear a woman crying, just like he told us about the tall figure which we both saw last night. The sobbing outside got louder, turning into a sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. It didn't sound entirely human anymore. It went on for too long without stopping, too even in a way that didn't seem natural. Listen to that, I said quietly. Really listen. Does that sound normal to you? Johnny paused, flashlight clutched in his hand. His face betrayed his conflict, the instinct to help warring with the growing realization that something wasn't right. We're not equipped to deal with this, I continued. The rules are there for a reason. If you go out there—" I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't have to. The crying woman's voice changed, getting weirdly attractive and scary at the same time. "Please, I can see your light. Please come help me. I'm right here. Just follow my voice." Johnny hesitated. "But what if it is someone who needs help, a real person? We can't just—" "Then they can call 911, I said firmly. "They have a phone if they're really in trouble. Our job is to stay here and follow the rules." The debate went on for almost an hour, and the woman's cries got more and more painful to hear. Johnny walked back and forth in the guard shack, checking his phone for reception. He kept suggesting we call the police and saying that no rule was worth letting someone suffer. But as time went by, the crying started to sound less human. It was too steady, too even, too perfect in how sad it sounded. Around midnight, it changed again. "Michael, Johnny, I know you're in there. Please help me. I just need someone to find me." Johnny's face went completely white. "How does it know our names?" I shook my head, unable to answer. No one had mentioned our names outside the guard shack since we'd arrived. The crying continued, now using our names every few minutes, making my skin crawl. By 1 a.m., Johnny couldn't take it anymore. He covered his ears with his hands and went to the break room, curling up on the couch with his back to the door. I watched him go, then returned to my spot by the window. The crying never stopped. It continued through the night, sometimes moving to different parts of the cemetery, sometimes sounding like it was right outside our door. The voice knew things it shouldn't have known. Details about our lives, comments about what we were wearing, observations about the guard shack. I kept the logbook open beside me, recording each location change and notable phrase, trying to stay professional even as my nerves wore thin. At 4:17 a.m., I checked on Johnny. He lay curled in a tight ball on the couch, eyes wide open, hands still pressed over his ears. The crying penetrated everything. Walls, doors, hands, minds. "Make it stop," he whispered when he saw me. "Please make it stop." I couldn't. Dawn came really slowly. As the first gray light came through the rain clouds, the crying finally began to fade, growing distant and then silent altogether. I wrote down the time in the logbook, 5:53 a.m. The crying had lasted for 7 hours and 11 minutes without a single pause for breath. Johnny came out of the break room looking really shaken. His face was pale, eyes bloodshot. Without a word, he gathered his things and waited by the door. We walked to the gates in silence. The rain had stopped, leaving the cemetery wet and misty in the early morning. I unlocked the gates and secured the guard shack, going through our closing routine. It wasn't until we were in Johnny's car, driving away from Lone Fir, that he finally spoke. "No normal woman could cry for 8 hours straight without stopping," he said, his voice hoarse. "No human being could do that." I nodded, staring at the wet streets passing by outside the window. "I had dreams yesterday," Johnny continued after a long pause. "About that thing in the 3rd row. It was watching me through my bedroom window, just standing there, staring in with no face." I turned to look at him. Johnny never admitted to being scared of anything. Now his hands shook on the steering wheel. "What did Harold tell us about quitting?" he asked. "Can we just not come back?" "We signed a week-long contract," I reminded him. 5 more nights." Johnny fell silent again, his lips pressed into a thin line. We drove the rest of the way without speaking, the memory of that crying voice still ringing in our ears. The morning after our second night at Lone Fir, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. I checked the screen with bleary eyes. A text from Johnny. "Should we just quit? Don't think I can take another night of whatever that was." I didn't respond right away. My apartment felt safe in the daylight, but memories of that crying voice knowing our names made my skin go cold. There was something really wrong about that cemetery, something beyond natural explanation. Part of me wanted to quit too. After a shower and 2 cups of coffee, I texted back, "We signed a contract. Just 3 more nights." Johnny's response came an hour later. "Fine, but this shit is real." I spent the day researching Lone First Cemetery, looking for any history of hauntings or unusual events. The official records showed nothing extraordinary, just a very old cemetery. I found a few ghost tour listings that mentioned Lone Fir as potentially haunted, but nothing about tall figures or crying women or specific rules to follow. By evening, dark clouds had built up over Portland again, looking like rain. I packed my bag with the usual supplies, flashlight, batteries, coffee, snacks, and waited for Johnny's car. When 7:15 came and went with no sign of him, I sent a text. "Where are you? We start in 45 minutes. 10 minutes passed before his reply. "Car won't start. Working on it. Go ahead and I'll get there when I can." My stomach dropped. Johnny's car had been running fine yesterday. A convenient mechanical failure right before our 3rd shift seemed suspicious. I called him, but the call went straight to voicemail. With no other choice, I ordered a rideshare and arrived at the cemetery gates alone at 7:55 p.m. The iron fence stood tall against the darkening sky, black and scary. Standing there by myself made the entrance seem much more threatening than on previous nights. I retrieved the keys from under the mat and let myself into the guard shack. The small building felt emptier without Johnny's nervous energy filling the space. I turned on all the lights, checked the coffee maker, and glanced at the logbook. My entry from the night before stared back at me. Crying woman heard from 10:42 p.m. until 5:53 a.m. Voice knew personal details. At 8:30 p.m., I locked all the gates as required by Rule 1. The cemetery stretched out dark and silent before me, empty except for the stones and trees. The 3rd row of graves where the figure had stood on our first night remained vacant for now. I returned to the guard shack and tried calling Johnny again. This time he answered. "Hey man, sorry." His voice sounded strained. "Still trying to get the car running. Might have to call a tow." "Are you really having car trouble, or are you just avoiding coming back here?" I asked. A long pause followed. "Both," he finally admitted. "I haven't slept more than 2 hours straight since we started this job. I keep hearing that crying in my dreams. We need to finish what we started," I said, looking out at the dark cemetery. "We don't know what happens if we break the contract." I know. I'll be there, okay? Just might be a little late." After hanging up, I sat down in my chair at the window. The quiet felt heavy. At least with Johnny here, we could distract each other from what was happening outside. Alone, I had nothing to focus on but the cemetery and its moving shadows. Minutes crawled by. I made coffee, looked around the grounds through the window, and read old logbook entries to pass the time. Every small sound made me look up, expecting to see the tall figure or hear the crying woman again. At 9:45 p.m., the door to the guard shack swung open. Johnny stood there. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Sorry I'm late," he mumbled, dropping his backpack on the floor. "Car's at the shop." "How'd you get here?" I asked. "Bus, then walked the last half mile." He slumped into the second chair, not making eye contact. "Anything happen yet?" I shook my head. "No. No tall figure, no crying woman." "Good. Maybe they take nights off." The joke fell flat, his voice lacking any humor. Johnny looked terrible. Beyond tired, he looked haunted. His hands trembled slightly as he unpacked his bag, pulling out 3 energy drinks and a container of caffeine pills. "Did you sleep at all today?" I asked. He shook his head. "Can't. Every time I close my eyes, I hear her crying. And when I finally do fall asleep, I dream about that thing in the 3rd row standing over my bed." He cracked open an energy drink. "I'm so tired I feel sick, but I can't sleep." "Maybe you should see a doctor," I suggested. "And tell them what? That I'm being haunted by cemetery ghosts?" Johnny laughed bitterly. "They'd put me on a psychiatric hold." We settled into a nervous routine, both of us watching the cemetery through the window. Johnny jumped at every small noise, the heater kicking on, the coffee maker gurgling, the wind rattling the door. As the night got deeper, the cemetery stayed quiet. No tall figure appeared in the third row. No woman's crying could be heard through the darkness. I began to hope that maybe, just maybe, we'd get through a night without anything happening. That hope died at midnight. "Mike," Johnny whispered, pointing out the window. "Look." Between the headstones, faint blue shapes had appeared. See-through figures moving slowly among the graves. Some knelt beside headstones, others wandered along the paths. They gave off a soft glow that didn't light up anything around them. I counted at least 7 different ghosts, men and women wearing clothes from different time periods. None looked directly at the guard shack. They seemed in their own little worlds, not aware of us watching them. "Are those—" Johnny couldn't finish the sentence. "Ghosts," I said quietly, completing his thought. "Actual ghosts." Johnny went completely still beside me. All his nervous fidgeting stopped, replaced by a stiff silence. His face had gone pale, his lips pressed into a tight line. I picked up the logbook and wrote, 12 a.m. Multiple see-through figures seen throughout cemetery grounds. "We're not writing that," Johnny hissed. "No one will believe us." "Harold will," I replied. "He warned us about this." For the next hour, we watched the spirits move through the cemetery. They never approached the guard shack, staying among the graves. Some appeared to be visiting specific headstones, while others seemed confused, checking markers as if searching for something. At 1:20 a.m., movement near the window caught my attention. An elderly man stood just outside the guard shack, his translucent body glowing faintly blue in the darkness. He wore clothes that looked to be from the 1950s. High-waisted pants, suspenders, a button-up shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. His thinning white hair was neatly combed. Unlike the other spirits, he was looking directly at us. He raised a trembling hand and tapped softly on the glass. I glanced at Johnny. He backed away to the far corner of the room, his eyes wide with terror. The old man's voice came through the glass, soft but clear. "Excuse me, young man. I wonder if you might help me. I'm trying to find my wife's grave. We were married 62 years before she passed. I seem to have forgotten where they laid her to rest." Rule 5 repeated in my mind. Decline all requests for help from spirits. I stood up slowly and approached the window, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm not allowed to help you." The old man's face fell in disappointment, but he nodded. "I understand. There are rules, aren't there? Always rules." He looked at me with sad eyes. "Thank you anyway, son." His body grew dimmer, fading until he disappeared completely. I made another entry in the logbook, noting the time and the interaction. Johnny had pressed himself against the wall as far from the window as possible. "Was that real?" he whispered. "Did that just happen?" "Yes," I said simply, returning to my chair. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. That was real. Throughout the night, 3 more spirits came to the guard shack with similar requests. A woman in old-fashioned black funeral clothes asked for help finding her child's grave. A young man in what looked like a 1920s suit wanted help finding his brother. An elderly woman needed help finding her family plot. Each time, I politely said no, exactly as Rule 5 told me to. And each time, the spirits accepted my answer with sad acceptance before disappearing. Johnny stayed frozen in his corner, refusing to look outside or pay attention to the spirits when they came. He pulled his knees to his chest, making himself as small as possible. The hours went by slowly. Between spirit visits, I watched the ghostly figures moving among the headstones. They never got in each other's way. moving through one another like smoke when their paths crossed. None of them seemed evil or scary, just lost, confused, or sad. As 5 a.m. got closer, the spirits began to disappear one by one. By 5:15, the cemetery was empty again, no sign of the ghosts who had filled it all night. Johnny finally unfolded from his position in the corner, his joints popping as he stretched his stiff body. "We need to quit," he said, his voice hoarse from hours of silence. "Right now. Tell Harold we're done. Tell Harold we're—" I shook my head. "We only have 2 nights left." "2 more nights of this?" Johnny gestured wildly at the window. "Ghosts asking for help? That crying woman? That thing in the 3rd row? I can't do it, Mike. I can't." "What happens if we break the contract?" I asked. "We don't know what we're dealing with here. What if there are consequences?" Johnny ran his hands through his hair, leaving it standing on end. "What could be worse than what we've already seen?" "I don't know," I admitted. "And that's the problem. These rules exist for a reason. Harold warned us. I think we need to finish what we agreed to do." Johnny paced the small room, his movements jerky and agitated. "2 more nights," he finally said. "That's it, and I'm bringing my grandfather's rosary. I need some protection in this place." When 6 a.m. arrived, we opened the gates and locked up the guard shack in silence. The cemetery looked peaceful in the early morning light. No hint of the spirits that had walked its grounds hours before. Johnny pulled a small silver crucifix from his pocket. "My grandfather gave me this before he died. Said it protected him in World War II." He stuffed it back in his pocket. "Tomorrow night, I'm bringing the full rosary. We need all the help we can get." As we walked toward the street where Johnny's friend would pick us up, I looked back at the cemetery one last time. In the morning light, it was just a historic graveyard, beautiful in its way, with very old trees and ornate headstones. But I knew better now. We both did. 2 more nights," I said quietly. Johnny nodded, his face grim. 2 more nights. Night 4 at Lone Fir Cemetery was coming up after we'd both spent the day trying to recover on our own. I got a few hours of broken sleep with dreams of see-through ghosts asking me for help. At least I'd slept. Johnny looked like he hadn't closed his eyes at all when he picked me up that evening. "Hey," he said as I climbed into his car. His eyes were bloodshot, the skin beneath them dark and puffy. The shop had fixed whatever was wrong with his car, but nothing could fix what was wrong with us. "You look terrible," I told him. Johnny didn't even try to joke it off. "Yeah." He pulled away from the curb, one hand on the wheel while the other held something in his pocket. I saw a silver chain between his fingers. The drive to the cemetery passed in silence. Neither of us felt like talking. 2 more nights. Just 2 more. And we could get away from the thing at Lone Fir Cemetery. If it would let us go. We arrived at 7:40 p.m., 20 minutes early. The iron gates stood open. Johnny parked across the street instead of pulling up to the front like we usually did. "I don't want to be any closer than necessary," he explained, killing the engine. We walked across the street together, our footsteps dragging. Johnny kept looking over his shoulder, checking the darkening street behind us. He'd become jumpy, constantly checking his surroundings like he expected to see something following us. I unlocked the guard shack while Johnny stood watch, his back stiff and eyes darting between the graves. Inside, I turned on every light and checked all the corners as if something might be hiding in the small building. "All clear," I said, setting my bag on the desk. Johnny nodded and stepped inside, locking the door behind him. He pulled the rosary from his pocket, his grandfather's W-2 rosary. He hung it around his neck, tucking the cross under his shirt but leaving the beads visible. "My mom used to say these protect you from evil," he said quietly. I hope she was right. We went through our routine mechanically, checking the coffee maker, reviewing the logbook, making sure our flashlights worked. At 8:30 p.m., I stepped outside to lock the gates. "I'm coming with you," Johnny said, following close behind me. No way I'm staying in there alone. We locked the gates together, the heavy chain rattling as I threaded it through the iron bars. The sound bounced across the cemetery, making us both jump. Johnny kept one hand on his rosary the entire time, rubbing the beads between his fingers. Back in the guard shack, we sat side by side at the window, watching the cemetery in silence. The tall trees swayed slightly in the night breeze, creating moving shadows across the graves. Every shadow looked like a figure about to materialize. "Do you think they'll all come back tonight?" Johnny asked. "The tall thing, the crying woman, the ghosts?" "Probably," I said, "and the man in the white suit at 3:33. Johnny's hand tightened around his rosary. Rule 4. Don't let him in. Right. No matter what he says or does, we keep that gate locked. Hours crawled by. We barely spoke, both lost in our own thoughts while watching the cemetery grounds. The coffee pot gurgled in the background, a mundane sound in our increasingly abnormal situation. At 10:17 p.m., Johnny pointed toward the third row. "It's back." The tall figure stood exactly where we'd seen it on the first night, between two maple trees in the graves. Even from far away, I could tell it wasn't human. Too tall, too still, too dark against the night. "Don't look at it too long," Johnny whispered, turning away from the window. "I think it knows when we're watching." I made a note in the logbook. 10:17 p.m. Tall figure appeared in third row. Then I joined Johnny at the coffee maker, keeping my back to the window. "How long will it stay?" he asked, pouring coffee with shaking hands. "Last time it disappeared around 2:25 a.m., I said. "But I don't know if it follows a schedule." Johnny checked his watch. "About 4 more hours then." "Great." We tried to distract ourselves with mundane activities, checking our phones, though reception inside the guard shack was spotty at best, leafing through old magazines left by previous guards, taking turns in the bathroom. Anything to avoid looking directly at the figure standing motionless in the cemetery. But we still felt it there. It felt like it was pushing against the guard shack walls, making the air feel heavy. I caught Johnny looking at it several times, then quickly turning away like he was creeped out. At 11:32 p.m., the crying started. "Please, someone help me." The woman's voice came across the cemetery, soft at first, then growing steadily louder. She sounded closer than on previous nights, maybe in the second row of graves. Johnny immediately covered his ears. "Not again. I can't listen to this all night again." "Try to ignore it," I said, though I knew how impossible that was. The crying seemed designed to trigger every human instinct to help, to comfort, to rescue. "I'm so cold. Please help me find my way home." Johnny pressed his hands harder against his ears, eyes squeezed shut. The beads of his rosary clacked together as he rocked slightly in his chair. The crying continued, sometimes moving closer to the guard shack, sometimes going deeper into the cemetery. Like before, the voice knew things it shouldn't. Our names, what we were wearing, comments about the guard shack. It called to us directly, begged us by name, described how it could see us through the windows. "Michael! Johnny, please look at me. I'm right here. I just need your help." We endured it as best we could. I continued making entries in the logbook, tracking the crying woman's apparent movements through the cemetery. Johnny alternated between covering his ears and clutching his rosary, praying under his breath. At 2:25 a.m., right on time, the tall figure disappeared. One moment it stood in the third row, the next it was simply gone. Johnny didn't seem relieved by its disappearance. "Where did it go?" he asked, voice tight with anxiety. "Is it coming here?" "I don't know." I scanned the cemetery but saw nothing except the occasional translucent form of a spirit wandering among the graves. The crying continued unabated. Johnny checked his watch. "It's almost 3:30. I got nervous. Rule 4. At 3:33 a.m., a man in a white suit may appear at the front gate. Do not open the gate for him under any circumstances. We need to watch the front gate, I said, moving my chair for a better view of the entrance. Johnny nodded, looking pale under the fluorescent lights of the guard shack. He joined me at the window, holding his rosary. The minutes crawled by. 3:15, 3:22, 3:28. What do you think he wants? Johnny whispered. The man in white. Nothing good, I replied. Nothing that would make Harold put it in the rules. 3:31, 3:32. Johnny's breathing grew shallow. I realized I was holding my own breath, my eyes fixed on the main gates about 50 yards from the guard shack. At exactly 3:33 a.m., he appeared. A tall, thin man in a spotless white suit appeared at the front gate. He hadn't walked up. He was just there, suddenly, like he'd come out of nowhere. His skin was weirdly pale, almost glowing in the moonlight. Even from this distance, I could see his smile. Too wide for a human face, with too many bright white teeth. Good evening, gentlemen, he called out, his voice clear despite the distance. Would you be so kind as to open the gate for me? I have urgent business within. Johnny stood up abruptly. I grabbed his arm. What are you doing? I should open the gate, Johnny said, his voice oddly flat. He needs to come in. No. I tightened my grip on his arm. Remember the rules. We don't open the gate for him. Johnny didn't seem to hear me. His eyes had taken on a glazed, unfocused look. He reached for the ring of keys on the desk. I should let him in, Johnny repeated in the same monotone voice. He's waiting. It's only polite. I stepped between Johnny and the desk. Johnny, snap out of it. That's not a person out there. I need to open the gate. Johnny tried to push past me, his movements stiff and mechanical. He's waiting. Outside, the man in white stood perfectly still at the gate, that inhuman smile fixed on his face. He called out again, his voice somehow both pleasant and deeply wrong. I can see you're quite busy in there. I do apologize for the intrusion, but I really must come in. It will only take a moment of your time. Johnny lunged for the keys, catching me off guard. He snatched them from the desk and headed for the door. Johnny, stop! I grabbed his shoulder, but he shrugged me off with surprising strength. I have to let him in, Johnny said, unlocking the guard shack door. He's waiting for me. I tackled him from behind, both of us crashing to the floor. The keys went sliding across the linoleum. Johnny fought back harder than I'd ever seen before, twisting and struggling under me. Get off! He shouted, his voice no longer the flat monotone but filled with desperate anger. I have to open the gate. I have to. I pinned his arms, using all my weight to hold him down. Johnny, it's me, Mike. Snap out of it. Johnny thrashed wildly, nearly throwing me off. I caught a glimpse of his face. His eyes were completely blank, the pupils dilated so wide that no color showed. He wasn't seeing me at all. Through the window, I could see the man in white watching our struggle. His smile grew wider, impossibly wide, splitting his face in a way no human mouth could stretch. He raised one pale hand and waved at me. Johnny Wilson, he called, his voice somehow inside the guard shack now, inside my head. Come open the gate, it's time. Johnny renewed his struggle, throwing an elbow that caught me in the ribs. I grunted in pain but kept my grip. With one hand, I reached for the fallen keys, stretching my fingers toward them while keeping Johnny pinned with the rest of my body. Just a few more moments, the man in white said. His voice had changed, taking on harmonics that hurt my ears. The gate must be opened from within. Those are the rules. I managed to snag the keys with my fingertips, pulling them toward me and then shoving them into my pocket. Johnny howled in frustration, the sound more animal than human. Let me go, he screamed, bucking hard enough that I had to wrap both arms around him again. He's calling me, I have to go. Check your watch, I gasped, trying to reach through whatever had hold of Johnny. What time is it? The question seemed to confuse him. He stopped struggling for a split second. My watch? What time is it? I repeated. Check your watch, Johnny. Johnny moved his wrist to check his watch. The simple action seemed to break whatever hold the man in white had over him. Johnny blinked quickly, some awareness coming back to his eyes. "It's 3:34, he said slowly. I looked toward the window. The man in white was gone. He disappeared just as quickly as he showed up. The gate was empty, with moonlight shining on the padlock and chain we'd locked up hours earlier. Johnny went limp beneath me, all the fight draining out of him. He started shaking with sobs. "Oh God," he whispered. "Oh God, Mike, I was going to..." I cautiously let him go and sat back, shaking all over. "It's okay. He's gone now." Johnny curled into a ball on the floor, holding his rosary really tight. Tears ran down his face. I couldn't stop myself. He said between sobs. It was like he was in my head, moving my body. I could see what I was doing, but couldn't stop it. I leaned against the wall, still breathing hard. "You fought it at the end, when I asked you the time." Johnny nodded, wiping his face with his sleeve. For a second, that felt like my own thought. Everything else was him. He looked up at me, his eyes red and scared. "Thank you. If you hadn't stopped me..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We sat on the floor of the guard shack for a long time, neither of us willing to get up or look outside. The crying woman's voice had stopped at some point during our struggle. I hadn't even noticed when. The cemetery beyond the windows was quiet and dark. Johnny checked his watch again. 4:15, less than 2 hours until dawn. I nodded, too tired to speak. My ribs hurt where Johnny's elbow had caught me, and my knees hurt from hitting the floor. "We have to finish the contract," Johnny said after another long silence. "One more night. We can't break the rules now." "No," I agreed. "We can't." Johnny picked himself up from the floor, moving like an old man. He slumped into his chair, the rosary still wrapped around his hand. "Mike," he said quietly, "if I start acting weird again tomorrow night, if anything tries to control me again, whatever you have to do, don't let me break the rules, please." I nodded, meeting his eyes. "I won't." We sat quietly as night turned to morning. We kept watching the cemetery, looking for any sign of movement or those things that almost got Johnny. But nothing showed up. The man in white didn't win tonight, and the cemetery seemed to be following its own rules. At 6 a.m., we unlocked the gates and locked up the guard shack like normal. In the morning light, everything looked ordinary, just an old cemetery with trees and worn headstones. But we knew better. "One more night," Johnny said as we walked to his car. "One more night," I repeated. "Then we're done with this place." Johnny nodded, but I noticed how his eyes darted around the street, checking every shadow, every corner. I was doing the same thing. Whatever lived in Lone Fir Cemetery had reached into Johnny's mind, taken control of his body. We both knew there was a very real possibility that it could do so again. And tomorrow would be our final night. I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled up to Lone Fir Cemetery. Johnny's car sat parked near the entrance, front door still open, driver's seat empty. My final night as a cemetery guard had barely begun, and already the rules were being broken. I checked my watch, 7:46 p.m. We weren't due to start our shift for another 14 minutes. Johnny had never arrived early before, especially not after what happened with the man in white last night. I grabbed my backpack and walked through the iron gates, which were open as always at this hour. The cemetery was quiet and seemed normal in the dimming evening light. No tall figures, no crying women, no spirits yet. Just rows of old headstones and maple trees. Then I spotted Johnny. He wasn't moving about 20 yards away, facing the third row of graves where the tall figure usually showed up. His back was to me. "Johnny," I called out, approaching cautiously. He turned slowly, like a robot. His face looked pale, his eyes unfocused. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat. "Mike, you're here." "Yeah. Why are you out in the cemetery? We should be in the guard shack." I glanced toward the third row nervously. "What are you doing?" "Watching." Johnny's gaze drifted back to the empty space between the maples. "I wanted to see where it comes from." A chill ran down my back. This wasn't the Johnny I knew. Not the one who'd been curled up sobbing on the floor of the guard shack last night after nearly opening the gate. This Johnny stood too straight, moved too stiffly. "Let's go inside," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to start our shift. Lock the gates at 9, remember?" Johnny nodded slowly. "The rules. Yes, we have to follow the rules." He walked past me toward the guard shack, moving strangely, like someone trying to remember how human legs worked. I followed a few steps behind, watching him closely. The way he moved gave me the creeps. Inside the guard shack, Johnny sat in his usual chair but didn't relax into it. He sat on the edge, back straight, hands on his knees. His eyes kept looking out the window, toward the third row of graves. "Did you sleep at all today?" I asked, setting my backpack down and turning on the coffee maker. Johnny didn't answer for several seconds. When he did, his voice sounded normal again, almost making me doubt what I'd seen outside. "Not really. Kept having nightmares." He rubbed his eyes. The man in white was in all of them, standing next to my bed. I studied Johnny's face. The dark circles under his eyes had gotten worse, and his skin looked sick under the fluorescent lights. But his face looked more like himself now. Tired, scared, but present. Johnny nodded, pulling the rosary from his pocket. The wooden beads looked worn, some of them cracked from how tight he'd been holding them. "I think I should patrol the grounds," Johnny said suddenly. "I nearly spilled the coffee I was pouring." "What?" "No. That's a terrible idea." "We need to make sure the cemetery is secure," he insisted, standing up. "It's part of our job." "Our job is to stay in this guard shack and follow the rules," I countered. "We've never patrolled before, and we're not starting now." Johnny's eyes looked distant again. "I just want to check something." "No." I stepped between him and the door. "After what happened last night, we're staying right here. Both of us." For a moment, tension filled the small room. Johnny stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. Then his shoulders slumped, and he sat back down. "You're right," he muttered. "Staying here is safer." I didn't fully believe his sudden change of heart, but I nodded and handed him a cup of coffee. At 8:30 p.m., I stepped outside to lock the gates, making Johnny promise to stay put while I did so. I chained and padlocked the iron gates. The cemetery was quiet. I quickly went back to the guard shack and was glad to see Johnny still sitting by the window. The hours went by slowly. Johnny barely spoke. He just kept looking out at the cemetery. I kept busy by writing in the logbook, making more coffee and checking my phone even though it had bad signal. I tried to act like it was a normal night shift. At 10:17 p.m., I looked for the tall figure in the third row, just like last night. Nothing showed up. The area between the maple trees was empty. "It's late," I commented, checking my watch again. Johnny nodded with a weird half-smile on his face. "It'll come. It always comes." His certainty made my stomach knot. I tried to focus on the positives. No crying woman yet either. Maybe our last night would be uneventful. Maybe the things that haunted Lone Fir were giving us a break. That hope died at exactly midnight. The tall figure appeared between the maple trees without warning. There, one instant. Not there the second before. It looked darker than the surrounding night, a void shaped vaguely like a person but too tall, too thin, its proportions wrong in ways that hurt to look at. Johnny stood up so abruptly his chair crashed to the floor. "It's time," he whispered. Before I could react, he unlocked the guard shack door and stepped outside. "Johnny!" I scrambled after him. "What are you doing? Get back here!" He walked straight toward the third row, his pace steady and determined. I ran after him, calling his name, but he didn't look back. "Stop! Remember the rules!" I screamed, my voice echoing across the silent cemetery. "Don't approach the figure in the third row." Johnny kept walking. The tall figure didn't move, just a black shape against the night sky. It looked like it was waiting. I caught up to Johnny about 20 yards from the guard shack and grabbed his arm. He turned super fast, pushing me off with strength that seemed way too much for him. I stumbled backward, almost falling over a small headstone. "Johnny, please." My voice broke with desperation. "Don't do this." He paused, turning halfway toward me. In the moonlight, his face looked wrong, too smooth, his eyes too dark. "I have to go to it," he said, his voice oddly calm. "It's waiting for me. Fight it, Johnny, like you did last night with the man in white." I saw something in Johnny's expression. Maybe he recognized me or was scared. For just a moment, I thought I could see my actual friend there, fighting against whatever was controlling him. But then it was gone. Johnny looked away and kept walking toward the tall person. I ran and tackled him from behind, hitting him right in the middle. We fell to the ground between two graves. Johnny struggled under me, moving in weird, jerky ways like a puppet. "Let me go," he snarled, his voice deeper than it should have been. "It's calling me. Johnny, snap out of it." I tried to pin his arms, but he bucked wildly, throwing me to the side. He got to his feet and ran the rest of the way to the third row. I jumped after him. My fingers touched the back of his jacket, but I couldn't grab it. Johnny stopped right in front of the tall shadow. For one scary moment, they looked at each other, my friend and the weird darkness standing there. Then Johnny just collapsed, falling to the ground suddenly. "Johnny!" I ran to him, skidding to my knees beside his crumpled form. I rolled him onto his back, checking for a pulse, for breathing, for any sign of life. His eyes stared upward, unseeing. His skin felt cold to the touch. I couldn't find a pulse in his neck or wrist. The tall figure still stood there, barely 3 feet away. I couldn't see a face in that darkness, but I felt it watching me, watching Johnny. I grabbed Johnny under the arms and began dragging him back toward the guard shack, my body running on pure adrenaline. His limbs flopped lifelessly as I pulled him across the grass. I didn't look back to see if the figure followed. I couldn't bear to know. Inside the guard shack, I laid Johnny on the floor and started CPR, pressing frantically on his chest while calling his name. Between compressions, I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency?" The operator's voice sounded tiny and distant. "My friend collapsed," I gasped, continuing chest compressions. "Lone Fir Cemetery, the guard shack. Please hurry, I think he's not breathing." "Sir, is he responsive at all? Can you check for a pulse?" I put the phone on speaker and laid it beside Johnny's head, placing my fingers against his neck again. Still nothing. His skin grew colder by the second. "No pulse," I reported, resuming compressions. "He just collapsed. Please hurry." "Emergency services are on their way," the operator assured me. "Continue CPR until they arrive. I'll stay on the line with you." I pumped Johnny's chest, counting under my breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tears blurred my vision. Johnny's face was slack, his eyes open and empty. Then his eyelids twitched. "Johnny?" I leaned closer, hope surging through me. "Johnny, can you hear me?" His eyes opened fully, looking at my face. But something was really wrong. They weren't Johnny's eyes anymore. The pupils had gotten so big they covered the entire iris, making them completely black. Johnny's mouth opened, and the voice that came out wasn't his. "Johnny Wilson is claimed," it said, the words resonating with impossible depth. "He broke the rules." I scrambled backward, knocking over the phone. The 911 operator's voice called out, asking if I was still there. The thing wearing Johnny's face sat up smoothly, its movements nothing like my friend's usual awkward energy. It turned Johnny's head to look at me, the black eyes reflecting nothing. He intended to open the gate for the man in white, the voice continued, using Johnny's vocal cords to produce sounds that weren't remotely human. "Intention is action. The rules were broken." "Give him back," I whispered, my back pressed against the wall. Johnny's face smiled, the expression stretching his features unnaturally wide. "He belongs to the cemetery now, as will you, eventually." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The thing inside Johnny got up, moving in a creepy way. "You're marked, Michael Thompson. You've seen us. You've heard us. You've touched stuff you shouldn't have." It pointed at Johnny's body, which it controlled now. "Following the rules has kept you safe for now, but we'll find you." From the floor, the 911 operator's voice got more urgent. Sir, are you there? What's happening?" Johnny's body stepped toward me, looking like it was almost floating. "Run if you want. It won't matter how far you go. The rules will follow you." I dove for the door, pulled it open, and stumbled outside. Behind me, Johnny stayed in the guard shack, with that scary smile stuck on his face. I ran across the cemetery toward the main gates, digging in my pocket for the keys. The chain made noise as I unlocked the gates with shaky hands. I threw them open and ran into the street, not looking back at anything. I ran until I couldn't breathe and my legs felt like giving up. I ran past houses with lights on, past people walking dogs who looked at me weird. I ran until I reached a bright gas station and fell against the wall, catching my breath and shaking all over. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to see many missed calls from the 911 dispatcher. As I looked at the screen, a text message showed up from a number I didn't know. "The rules follow you, Michael Thompson." I dropped the phone like it had burned me. That night, I packed everything I could fit into my car. I left no forwarding address, didn't tell anyone where I was going. I drove south, stopping only for gas and coffee, putting as many miles as possible between myself and Lone Fir Cemetery. 2 weeks later, I found an apartment in Tucson, Arizona. I changed my phone number, deleted my social media accounts, cut all ties to my old life in Portland. I found a night job stocking shelves at a supermarket. I couldn't sleep at night anymore anyway. During the day, I researched protection methods from every religion and culture I could find, lining my apartment windows with salt, hanging charms and symbols on my doors. For a while, I thought it might have worked. The dreams about Johnny's face with those black eyes grew less frequent. I started to build a new life, carefully avoiding parks, funeral homes, and especially cemeteries. Then, 3 weeks after arriving in Tucson, I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of a woman crying outside my bedroom window. "Please, help me. I'm so lost." I pulled my pillow over my head, trying to block out the sound, but I knew it wouldn't help. I knew what the thing in Johnny's body had told me was true. The rules had followed me. They always would.